My best friend attacked me after his wife made false accusations about our affair. The last 4 days have been a surreal descent into confusion, pain, and frustration, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Each day, I felt myself drifting further from a reality I recognized, watching helplessly as friendships I've spent years building disintegrate, and trust I thought unshakable cracks under the weight of a lie. I'm writing here, not just to share, but because I don't know where else to turn for advice. I've seen others on Reddit get guidance during dark times, and I hope someone out there can offer a light to help me navigate this storm. My best friend's wife told him she had an affair with she didn't. It's completely fabricated, and yet, here I am, living through the consequences of her lie. My name is John. I'm 35 years old, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 8 years. We share 2 wonderful children who are our entire world. But this situation, this nightmare, isn't even about us. It's about my best friend Josh and his wife, Mary. Josh and I met in our freshman year of college, and from then on, we were inseparable. We bonded over tech. Our shared passion for gadgets and innovation made us feel like we were speaking a language no one else quite understood. Josh became my go-to person, the one I could rely on for advice or just a good, grounding conversation. I never imagined anything could shatter the friendship we had built over the years. Josh began dating Mary about 5 years ago. From the beginning, Mary didn't exactly blend into our world. She seemed almost like an anomaly, loud, unapologetically self-centered, and always demanding attention. Sarah and I live a quieter life, and while I know people come in all varieties, it was hard not to notice that Mary and Sarah didn't click. Sarah was polite, of course, but she always kept her distance. I think she saw something in Mary that I didn't quite catch early on, a kind of red flag that I was too loyal to Josh to recognize. But even so, we included her in our lives, attending gatherings, dinners, and celebrations where she would be present, often for Josh's sake more than ours. Josh's relationship with Mary was always volatile. For 4 years, they were on and off, breaking up and reuniting in what seemed like an endless cycle. Mary often initiated these breakups, and I couldn't understand why Josh, who deserved stability and happiness, kept returning to her. The strain on him was visible. Mary had a way of turning her dissatisfaction into Josh's failure, manipulating him into believing that he wasn't doing enough, wasn't caring enough, wasn't trying hard enough. Each time they broke up, he'd confide in me, visibly worn down but still convinced that he could somehow make things right if only he could be better. She had even cheated on him, twice to my knowledge, yet she convinced him that her infidelity was somehow his fault. It was painful to watch, and even Sarah, who typically stays out of others' affairs, voiced her concerns to me. She couldn't stand Mary's influence on Josh. Eventually, Josh and Mary got married. It was last year, and though I wasn't thrilled about the match, I kept my thoughts to myself. I didn't want to ruin my friend's happiness or second-guess his choice on the day that should have been the happiest of his life. But deep down, I felt a weight settle over me, a feeling that Mary's presence would only lead to more hurt for Josh and for those around him. Then, a month ago, it happened again. Josh discovered that Mary had been unfaithful, this time with a colleague from her workplace. Heartbroken and devastated, Josh came to stay with us for a week, seeking refuge from the chaos his life had become. Sarah and I welcomed him with open arms. He needed a safe place to grieve, to process, and to find his bearings. I offered every bit of support I could, even advising him on his rights since he had bought their house before they got married. Josh needed to understand that the law was on his side, that he didn't have to let her take over the place he called home. After a week of contemplation, he gathered the courage to go back, confront her, and ask her to leave. With the police's help, she moved out, retreating to her parents' home, and Josh began preparing to file for divorce. In the weeks that followed, I stood by him. We talked about lawyers, about the divorce process, about the future he now faced alone. He was lost, and I became his anchor, ready to help him navigate the overwhelming tides of change. Then last Saturday, Mary returned to his house to retrieve her belongings. I advised Josh to leave while she gathered her things, to avoid unnecessary drama, but he refused. He wanted to make sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. It was a choice that would mark the beginning of this night. During that encounter, something unfathomable happened. In the heat of their argument, Mary accused him of betraying, but the betrayal wasn't the one we all knew about, the affair with her co-worker. Instead, she claimed that I, his best friend, had been sleeping with her throughout their marriage, that we'd had trysts right in their home, in their very bed. The shock and pain were visible in Josh's face. She saw his vulnerability, his trust in me, and she twisted it into a weapon to hurt him, to make him feel the anguish she had caused him once again, only this time through me. Hours later, I found myself face to face with Josh, and the person standing before me was not the friend I had known for nearly 2 decades. He was seething with anger, barely recognizable, and every accusation he threw at me felt like a knife. He cursed, yelling and shouting that I had violated his trust, and he lunged at me. The kids weren't home, thank God, but Sarah was. She stood there, horrified as he attempted to strike me. I managed to deflect his blow, wrestling him to the ground in a desperate bid to calm him down. Through gritted teeth, I swore up and down that what Mary had said was a lie, that I had never once been alone with, let alone done the thing she accused me of. I felt Sarah's hand on my arm as she threatened to call the police. I urged Josh to see reason, to remember the years we'd spent as friends, but nothing seemed to reach him. His trust in me had been shattered by one devastating lie, and I could see the friendship we'd built falling apart before my eyes. After Josh stormed out, my house felt like a crime scene. The air was thick with tension, and Sarah was inconsolable. She had watched her husband accused of an unforgivable act, and despite my assurances that Mary was lying, I knew the seed of doubt had been planted. It took hours to calm her down, to hold her and tell her again and again that I had done nothing wrong. I have always worked from home, with few occasions to go out alone, and I was confident that Sarah knew this, knew my character and who I was. But Mary's lie had poisoned the air, and I could see the toll it was taking on Sarah. She was different, more withdrawn, quieter, as if part of her was processing something that words alone couldn't fix. And as if the damage done to my marriage weren't enough, Josh went a step further. In his grief and betrayal, he took Mary's word as truth and spread her lie to our mutual friends. Suddenly, my phone calls went unanswered, and I could feel the absence of support, the silence of friendships that once were my solace. Sarah tried reaching out to Mary, hoping perhaps she could reason with her, but Mary ignored us. I was watching as everything I'd built, my friendships, my marriage, my life, began to crumble, and I had no control over any of it. Josh, once the friend who trusted me implicitly, now saw me as the ultimate traitor. In his eyes, I was the one who had wrecked his marriage. He was unreachable, unwilling to hear my side of the story, convinced that I had betrayed him. My other friends, who knew us both for years, seemed to side with him, believing Mary's story, or at the very least not challenging it. They seemed to accept the version where I was the villain, taking his wife behind his back. I was angry, frustrated, but mostly, I felt helpless. How could I make them see the truth when the lie had already spread like wildfire? First of all, I need to thank everyone who commented on my original post, especially those who suggested taking the legal route. You/a dangerous 1243 and others mentioned defamation as a viable option, and that planted the seed of a plan. Up until then, my mind had been fixated on how to get Mary to confess directly or how to convince Josh. The emotional whirlwind had made it nearly impossible to think rationally. I just kept replaying everything, wishing I could change something, anything, to avoid the pain of watching my relationships crumble over something I never did. But the suggestion of a lawsuit was a revelation. It felt like a life. I realized that pursuing the legal route might be my best option to reclaim my reputation and get the truth to finally break through the web of lies Mary had spun. That evening, Sarah and I sat down, reading through all the supportive comments and suggestions late into the night. They offered more than just advice. They gave us hope. While I had anticipated some backlash online, the majority of commenters empathized with our situation and offered guidance, which was a relief. As we read, Sarah's resolve became apparent. She didn't hesitate when I asked if we should consult a lawyer. She looked me squarely in the eyes, and with a reassuring smile, she said she trusted me completely. This affirmation meant the world, especially since the last few days had been riddled with the tension of unspoken worries and doubts. But she emphasized that our children deserved a life untainted by rumors, a life where they wouldn't hear whispers that their father had been unfaithful. She was ready to fight, not just for my reputation, but for the integrity of our family. The next morning, we acted quickly. Sarah reached out to her mother's close friend, an experienced attorney who knew the ins and outs of defamation cases. This friend advised us to come in as soon as possible, even if it was just for a consult, and that's what we did. By midday, we were sitting across from her in her office, recounting every painful detail of the past week. She listened intently, occasionally nodding and taking notes. When we finished, she began explaining our options, validating that yes, Mary's accusations could indeed be considered defamation. False statements intended to damage a person's reputation, especially when they involve accusations of infidelity and moral transgression, have legal precedence as grounds for slander. Her calm, professional demeanor was a balm to our frayed nerves. However, she didn't sugarcoat the path ahead. She warned us that defamation lawsuits are notoriously lengthy and expensive, often dragging on for years. Winning the case wasn't guaranteed, and even if we did, it might take a toll emotionally and financially. Sarah and I exchanged glances. While we were both committed to clearing my name, the prospect of a prolonged legal battle weighed heavily on us. But then, the attorney offered a more strategic approach. She suggested that we could use the lawsuit as leverage, not necessarily to take Mary to court, but to press her into making a public retraction. We devised a plan to send Mary a letter of intent to sue for defamation, outlining that if she did not formally retract her statement, we would proceed with the case. The attorney explained that Mary might comply to avoid the legal ramifications. The threat of a lawsuit would likely intimidate her, as she'd have to face the possibility of public exposure of her lie. However, we would need Josh's cooperation to recount exactly what Mary had told him, as his statement would serve as crucial evidence if we were forced to go to trial. This was a complicated point. Approaching Josh about this was like stepping into a minefield, but it was a risk we had to take. We gave the attorney the green light to draft the letter, which she promised to expedite. By Friday morning, we received confirmation that the letter had been delivered to Mary at her parents' house. The document clearly stated that if she didn't provide an official written retraction of her statements, we would proceed with the defamation lawsuit by the end of the month. The letter instructed Mary to communicate solely through the law firm to avoid direct confrontation. It also detailed the emotional and social harm her accusation had caused, laying out the grounds of our case should she choose to ignore the notice. With the letter sent, I knew it was time to reach out to Josh. I knew that if he was ever going to believe the truth, he had to hear that I was willing to fight in court to prove my innocence. It was the only way I could hope to break through the wall of deception Mary had built between us. So I messaged him, explaining that we were taking legal action against Mary due to her false allegations. I let him know that we wouldn't rest until the lie was exposed and my name was clear. I mentioned that our lawyers would need to speak with him in the coming days and hoped he'd be willing to cooperate by recounting Mary's accusations exactly as she had told them to. That Saturday morning began like any other, with the smell of coffee filling the kitchen and my kids happily chatting away with Sarah at the table. I was cooking breakfast, finally starting to feel some relief after a week of tension. But then the doorbell rang, and everything changed in an instant. I glanced at the Ring camera feed and froze. Standing outside, looking uncertain, and frankly, out of place on our doorstep were Josh and Mary. I wasn't ready for this. In fact, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready to see them again, especially not together. I was just about to tell Sarah to stay back and avoid a confrontation, but she didn't need any instruction. Before I could even process the situation, she'd bolted to the door, and I could only watch as she swung it open, her barely 5-foot frame brimming with fury. Her voice was steady, but filled with a fierceness I hadn't often seen. "Josh," she began, her voice a sharp reprimand. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you, supporting you through all of Mary's betrayals, standing by your side when you were at your lowest?" Her words came fast, punctuated with pain and anger. She was speaking for both of us, for every sleepless night, every anxious moment spent wondering how we could ever set things right again. Josh stood there, barely able to meet her gaze. He kept murmuring that he only wanted to talk to me, his voice pleading. But Sarah wasn't done. "Talk?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You want to talk now? After you tore our lives apart over a lie?" She didn't relent, and I could tell Josh felt the weight of every accusation she was making. The anger in her voice was laced with hurt that I knew came from the betrayal we both felt, not just from Mary's lie, but from Josh's choice to believe it without question. Then Mary interjected, her voice wavering but with an edge of exasperation. She finally spoke the words I had been waiting for, albeit in a twisted way. "I'm sorry, all right?" she said, glancing at Josh, frustration clear in her tone. "I said what I said because he was abusing me while I was packing. I just said something to hurt him back." Her words tumbled out, and I could feel a strange mix of relief and disgust. She was confessing, admitting that it was all a lie, a tactic to wound Josh, a way to retaliate in the heat of their argument. But Sarah wasn't satisfied. She turned to Mary, her voice cold and controlled. "You better get yourself a good lawyer because you're going to need one when our attorneys contact you," she warned. Then, shifting her gaze back to Josh, she delivered a final blow. "You want to talk to my husband? Fine. But only after you've fixed the mess you made. Only after you make things right." With that, she slammed the door shut, and their stunned expressions faded from view. From the kitchen, I had watched the entire confrontation unfold on the Ring camera, too stunned to interrupt. But as the door clicked shut, a sense of relief washed over me. We had it. Recorded proof that Mary had lied. The confession was now part of the Ring camera footage, saved and ready for us to use. In an instant, all the weight that had crushed me for days began to lift. I forwarded the video to our lawyer, who sent back a quick thumbs-up emoji, followed by a brief call to arrange a meeting on Monday. Her voice was calm but enthusiastic as she confirmed that we now had undeniable proof. She explained that we could use Mary's confession to force a retraction, potentially ending this nightmare sooner than we'd hoped. About an hour after the confrontation, a notification pinged on my phone. It was from Josh in our friends group chat. He confessed publicly to spreading false information about me, expressing shame for having believed Mary's lie. The message was awkwardly phrased, but it was clear he was trying to make amends, at least to the extent he could. Moments later, Mary herself messaged the group. Her tone was guarded, claiming that her words had been misinterpreted by Josh and that the statements he shared were inaccurate. She framed the confession as part of their rocky relationship and requested privacy, asking friends to pray for them. It was a weak apology, but her admission that Josh had misunderstood her was at least a step in the right direction. With those messages, I felt a wave of satisfaction. Our friends finally knew the truth. I could almost see their reactions, the shocked silence, the disbelief. There was vindication in knowing that I no longer had to carry the weight of false accusation. In that moment, it felt like a victory, even if the scars of the past week would take time to heal. The rest of the day was spent in a state of strange, almost surreal calm. I took the kids to their usual Saturday activities, played games with them, and relished the simplicity of a normal day. Meanwhile, Sarah made the rounds with our friends and their spouses, sharing the story as it had happened, but withholding certain detail. I'd asked her not to share the ring footage or mention Mary's affair with her coworker. Josh had confided in us about that, and even though he'd betrayed my trust, I didn't want to stoop to his level. There were things that didn't need to be part of the gossip, details that, out of respect for the friend he had once been, I would choose to keep private. Later that evening, Sarah filled me in on the friends' reactions. People were shocked, not only by the truth about Mary's lie, but also by the fact that Josh had actually come to our home and physically attacked me over it. The anger, the frustration, they were all emotions I could understand. After all, if Mary had fed him the lie while he was at his lowest, he must have been struggling to hold himself together. But that didn't excuse what he did, and everyone in our circle now knew it. Reflecting on everything that has happened, I realized just how profoundly this ordeal has impacted my friendships. In my initial shock and pain, I thought everyone in our circle had turned against, but that wasn't exactly true. 4 friends reached out, and their calls meant more than they could know. Each one said something along the lines of, "We know how crazy Mary is. How can we help you?" Their words cut through the isolation I had felt, reminding me that some people, even in the thick of gossip and misunderstandings, still saw the real me and believed in my character. One friend even shared how Josh had twisted the story when he spread the lie. Josh had told him about the supposed affair between Mary and me, but had left out any mention of her affair with her coworker. Josh spun his version in such a way that it seemed I was the only reason for their marriage breaking down, conveniently ignoring the real and concrete betrayal Mary had committed. As a result, most people were under the impression that Josh was getting divorced solely because of my alleged act. It made me realize that Josh had probably known deep down that the truth would make people question Mary, so he opted for a selective truth. By omitting key details, he had painted me as the sole villain in his story. Now, the support from my friends who stood by me has given me clarity about who I can truly rely on. Those who waited in silence, unwilling to reach out until the truth was irrefutable, aren't people I'll hold grudges against, but I'm also not sure they'll remain as close as they once were. The friends who took the time to ask from my side, to listen and offer help, they're the ones I know I can trust. As for Josh, I've made my peace with the fact that our friendship is over. No amount of explanation or regret on his part will undo the damage done, and no words could erase the pain I felt when he chose to believe Mary over me. In his rage and pain, he lashed out, and I won't ever forget the betrayal. If he had come to me as a friend, as a brother, and asked me honestly, I would have respected him for that. But his choice to take Mary's word at face value and act out in violence, in accusations, that destroyed any bridge left standing. I owe it to my family to ensure their safety and stability. The lawyer is preparing the temporary restraining order, TRO, against Josh. Based on the evidence we have from the confrontation at my house and the ring footage, it should be granted. Mary's TRO might be harder to secure, but our attorney still believes it's worth attempting. Her lie triggered all of this chaos, and I have to think about what she might do next, given her track record. For now, it's a waiting game to see if the court will grant it. I don't hold any illusions about Mary facing real consequences beyond this TRO, but part of me feels the need to set boundaries firmly in place. It's strange. I thought by taking these steps, I'd feel vindicated, and in some ways I do. But knowing that Mary's lie cost Josh everything fills me with a sense of pity. She won in a way. She's ruined his support system, taken away the people who would have stood by him as he moved forward from his divorce. She managed to turn Josh's closest friends against him, simply by planting a seed of doubt. The person who was helping him the most through the divorce process is no longer there. I doubt that many of our friends will stand by him after what he did at my house. And now, he's left to confront his issues alone. I can't imagine he's feeling anything but regret, anger, and shame at this point. I hope he finds the strength to seek the professional help he clearly needs. As for Mary, she will likely walk away from this situation relatively unscathed. She may have to pay our legal fees, something my wife is determined to push for on Monday. But beyond that, she'll move on, leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. My wife's insistence on the legal fees isn't just about the money, it's about principle. Mary set this nightmare into motion, and we both feel that she shouldn't be able to walk away without consequence. I don't think Mary feels any remorse. She probably thinks of this as a battle won, another situation she manipulated to her benefit. But in the end, she's alienated everyone around her, even her husband. Her pattern of behavior will catch up with her one day. To everyone who commented, offering advice and encouragement, thank you. Your suggestions and support kept us grounded and reminded us that we weren't alone. My wife wants to extend her thanks as well. She's been my rock through all of this, and together, We've emerged from the chaos stronger than ever. It's over now, and though there are scars, I can finally see a path forward. I can finally start to heal and rebuild, knowing who truly stands with me.